good to see all of you, the ones I see, and see everybody's name. So no need to have the cameras on if you don't have them on, but I get it. It's well, at least for me, for Henry and me, it's early in the morning. I think with the older Jeanette, I think you might be now similar to our time zone, but everybody else is in who knows what time zone at this point. I kept losing track. So good to see you all. Let me start sharing my screen. And we're going to start today with a series of workshops that I like to call effective research writing or effective science writing. It's really, I mean the same by that. Sometimes I use one term and sometimes the other, depending on who knows what, right? But it's really the idea of what are some things that we can do as we are drafting and writing to make sure that our writing, and I think a lot of people call it quote unquote flows well, right? Because that's usually like, oh, this doesn't flow well, or this seems choppy. Like that's sometimes how I feel about my own writing, and also what I've heard other people articulate around writing that was difficult to follow, right? And I think the goal for us should always be to minimize the difficulty for the reader as much as possible to follow our work. And there's going to be some folks who will not be able to follow your work, and others, and it has to do with disciplinary convention audiences, and that's okay. But you want to make sure that the audience of your peers, who are the folks who are going to give you reviews, as well as the editor of the journal where you're submitting your manuscript, has no problem with it, as well as in previous stages, any kind of IRB board, internal research boards, or any of us, so anybody really who reads your work. So I have a couple of slides just to get us in the kind of right mindset for, kind of thinking about writing. And I say this a lot, but writing is really difficult, and it's difficult for anybody. I know for some folks, just like myself, English isn't their primary language or the first language that, I know for me, it's not the first language I learned to read and write in. On the contrary, it's maybe like the third. So it's tough on that level as well, but writing is really hard for everyone. So trust me, I have worked with tons of native speakers over the course of my career, and I have only met a few who are like, I can just, sit there and it's always easy. It's work. So it is a lot of mental work. And what really, I think what we're doing in our writing, particularly I want you to think of this as you're writing both your proposals, but ultimately the manuscripts, it's about making connections, right? We talked about this, like the research guide. What do we know? What don't we know? And what does my study contribute? We're constantly making these really high order connections, and we have to express this, or we try to express this in our writing. It's about synthesizing, and thinking and figuring these things out is tough. So it takes time. Hence, we have these meetings, right? Where it's not just, so it's about the quality of your research, but also how we present it. And I do want to say something about how writing identity can be intertwined. So as you're getting feedback and critique by others, it's sometimes specifically when it happens on the journal level, it can be hard to take at times. And if that's what you're feeling, is like, oh my God, this is just difficult. That's okay. It's perfectly fine, because even though it is research writing and it is abstract, objective, sort of quote unquote science, it is very much linked to our identity.
Isabell?
Yes.
You sent out a link to an article about a week ago about the effect of rejection.
Yes. Did I send this to the graduate school, right?
Yes, right.
Yeah.
I mean, I could search for the link, but
yeah. If you, I can look for it later as well. But if you have it, that would be great.
Okay, let me quickly do a search. Yeah. So, I mean, right? We get rejected, and we take it personally, right?
Absolutely.
And so, this is a great example of writing and identity. Yeah. Let me see if I could find that.
And just for context, so there's two links, I think. One link was to an article, and it was based on I don't know if the scholar is German, but they certainly sounded like they had a German origin name. But this person decided to publish their CV of failures. So all the things that he didn't get, like any grants, awards, fellowships, places he wasn't getting published, So that was it's really interesting. And the point of the article was that we don't talk enough in academia around the fact that we face a lot of rejections. And that is, like we always celebrate, rightfully so, the accomplishments. But because of that, we sometimes tend to, or it feels like that's the only experience we ever have, or those are the dominant number of experiences, our successes. And they're really not. I would always say for every grant or every article that was accepted, every grant that was funded, I had maybe 5 or 6 others that weren't, right? I mean, I'm preparing a grant right now for the National Science Foundation. I'm not entirely sure if it actually is going to get funded for a variety of reasons, but it's not going to hinder me because ultimately I already have plans. If we don't get this funding, where else I would be able to submit it, right? So I'm thinking ahead because and it might get funded. Who knows, right? I'll let you know if it happens or if it doesn't happen. But it was an interesting point in this article, and you just put it. And then I also sent Jeanette. I know we need all the cheering up we can get. And then I sent another link to the actual CV that this person published. It was several years ago, actually. So this has been going on for a while. But I just wanted to emphasize that because that's important as we talk about writing and drafting and presenting our work, is that we face a lot of, maybe we have to find another word than rejection. We find a lot of not yets. That's how I like to think. It's not yet, not here, not now. Doesn't mean not ever. It might mean some changes. It might be, maybe putting the project aside because you don't have the time right now to think about rearranging it, if that's some of the feedback you've gotten. It might mean rethinking where you publish, how you present things. So, so it's really, there's a lot of complexity there. Thanks, Henry, for mentioning that. I forgot that I sent that.
Yeah, I found that article and link, so I'll post it on the chat. And also, I want you to know, Isabell, if you don't get funded, we will not think any less of you. Okay?
Thank you. Ditto here to anyone. Exactly. Because, the one thing I think we really have to, we have to know is that funding, getting grants, it's extremely competitive. And I've seen grant proposals that weren't funded, and I was frankly surprised because I thought they were really great. And then I saw what else was funded, and I'm like, well, that's also really great. So sometimes it's being at the right time with the right thing, and you just can't give up. You just have to, and then take the critique and then move on from there, right? That's, I think, the important lesson. We'll talk about this more when we'll look at probably a few weeks, when we look at how to respond to peer feedback. One of my favorite sessions. Thanks, Henry, for putting those in the link. So let me continue here. So, and I mentioned this before, so some of us believe we're great writers. That's great. And if you are, congratulations to you. I still have to work of thinking myself as a writer, because I think I'm I'm a teacher, I'm an educator, I'm a researcher, but writer is part of that mix. And so I think that has helped me to kind of really approach the writing process a little bit differently. So it's mental work, so just, things I've already said, but I just wanted to put this out there as a conversation for us that I think I have the slide twice for some reason. So I do want to, the series we're starting today, and we're looking at paragraph structure today, is really in the spirit of revising. So I don't care what you do in your first, second, third drafts, even if it's, like you're putting stuff on paper, whatever, as you're trying to write up your manuscript, methods, results, discussion, intro, whatever you do. So when, you get some stuff on paper, and don't be your worst critic, just get stuff on there. It can be longer than what you need, probably a lot if you're like me. It might be too short. You can always add later, but get stuff on paper, or on the screen, I should say, right? I say paper still, like we're writing on paper physically, but it's usually all screens. So these principles we're going to review today, or we're going to start reviewing today, have a lot of really, I want you to think of them as places, as principles to revise, right? This is not what I want you to think as your like as you're starting to draft your manuscript. This is when you already feel you have most of it written or a good chunk of it written, and you can take these to revision. And there's several principles that we're gonna review, and I just wanted to put them on the screen here. Why isn't this working? There we go. I'm gonna put my mouse there. So the focus really is in general, and paragraph structure is one vehicle to that. An active language that tells an accessible story where clear actors are doing something. Often I find scientific writing or research-based writing is riddled by passive, like things were always done to something or somebody. Like, well, somebody must be doing them. So again, in the methods results section, we can't avoid that all the time. We can honestly avoid that. We talked about this in our sessions on those sections, passive versus active voice. But in general, I think it's helpful to think of active voice driving it. So we'll have a session later on differences with passive and active voice and other ways to make our writing, quote unquote, more active. Because active means more engaging for the reader, right? Like think of it, like I'm not expecting you to write that, but you know, I don't know if you're into mystery novels. Agatha Christie was a very famous British mystery novel writer. She's written like Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple are two of her famous characters. I love them, love British mystery. You throw it at me, I'll read it. And I've read all of her work. And she's a very effective, you know, she tells a really great mystery story. That's not what I'm looking for in research writing, right? But I am looking for a story that you're telling me that engages me on some level as a reader, differently than a mystery novel, for sure. So we're going to take a look at strong verbs, clear actors. Something about sentence length will address strong transition and creating an easy reading experience for your readers. So those are the principles in general, sort of overarching things to think of as you're revising your work, to pay attention to. And we're going to take a look at some specific ways, some specific examples, some tools to look for that. So today, oh yeah, and then audience and genre matter. As I said, if you're writing for a more specific audience in a journal, you might have to do things a little differently than if you're writing for a broader journal or for a different interdisciplinary journal. And we can discuss that as you start deciding where you want to publish. So let me give you an example of, actually, let me demonstrate what I mean by this sort of active language by an example that I really like and that exemplifies a lot of what I think of as a good revision process. So this is from a company called Compugen that approached this gentleman called Mike Console, who's a writing consultant in the San Francisco Bay Area. And they approached him, again, their audience was the general public on their website. They wanted a mission statement that is really crisp and concise. And this is the draft they sent him as an example. So it's a long sentence. Compugen is a leading therapeutic product discovery company. And even before I continue, I want to point out a thing that I see a lot in research writing. This is one expression. 5 words. Leading therapeutic are 2 adjectives, right? And then product discovery company. We tend to do this a lot in academic writing, and I'm guilty as charged, or in research-based writing, where we take these different terms and throw them together and create a new, we call them compound words. For readers, it's difficult to think through them because you're going to be leading therapeutic product discovery company. There's a lot to remember here. So it already starts off with some intense kind of like lengthy stuff. Focused, and its company's focused on therapeutic proteins and monoclonal antibodies to address important unmet needs in the fields of immunology and oncology, either for Compugen or its partners. So it's a pretty lengthy sentence, not super lengthy, but lengthy enough, especially for a mission statement facing the public. So again, that's the purpose here. So this is maybe, people always like, well, but this is not for an academic paper. It's like, yes, it's not, but you really kind of want to strive towards really accessible language as much as possible, specifically in your intro and discussion sections. Because when you do that, you actually do the work of being really clear about what you're trying to say. And then it's going to be easier for the reader to follow that. And then you also make it easier for the reader to then read some more challenging, longer passages that you'll need because of the discipline-specific nature of your work. Does anybody have a question? I heard somebody unmute themselves. Or am I imagining things just possible too? But if there's a question, feel free to ask or put something in the chat. I'll check it, or Henry will alert me. Is there a question, Elvis?
No. Sorry, okay. I had
That's all right.
Issue with.
That's okay. I understand. So let me show you. You're still unmuted, Elvis. Thanks. There you go. So here's the revision. Compugen makes therapeutic products that boost the human immune system and fight cancer. So we have a clear actor, Compugen. There's no product leading discovery, whatever company. It makes these products that boost the human immune system and fight cancer. So monoclonal antibodies, oncology, those terms are taken away to really describe who is doing what. The next sentence could then maybe say something about, Compugen is a leader in its field, and maybe add some more discipline-specific terms, just to give it some more weight, maybe for some audiences that would appreciate that. But the message is driven by who is doing what. Like the example I always like to give is, academics tend to write sentences like this. There is a kicking action taking place between Paul and Tom. I'm like, what the heck? It's really Paul kicks Tom or Tom kicks Paul. We actually don't know who's kicking whom. We just know there is a kicking action taking place. Well, what does that mean? Like, who is kicking whom? So we have and often when we get more complex in our sentences and in our writing, we obscure meaning. We aren't as clear and as effective as we can be in our messaging. And it happens in the writing process, right? We're drafting things, our mind is already 10 thoughts ahead from our fingers and the stuff on the screen. So that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But in the revision process, that's what we have to pay attention to. All right. So structure paragraphs is what we're going to focus on today. Ta-da! And somehow I got this crazy background with a question mark. Not sure. I used the design option on a word. So what I want to work on with you today and expose you to, and this is kind of it's a tricky concept to understand, and it's one that's a little theoretical, but once you get it, it's really, I find, transformative to reading structure of text and also working on your own text. And this is something that many of us do intuitively, and it's called the old versus, the known new contract, or old versus new information. It has to do with what we place at the beginning and at the end of sentences, and then at the beginning of the next sentence and the end of the next sentence. And it really, if we follow this old versus new, old new contract is what I call it. If we follow this old new contract, we create really good transition and flow in our writing. When we don't do that, we tend to have these moments that feel like, I don't know if you've ever ridden in a car and you go over like big bumps in the road. That's what it kind of feels like. It's a very bumpy ride. My son Tommy, when he would take him on a drive, we took him on a drive yesterday in his tricycle on a push cart, and we pushed him over some, and he's like, "It's a bumpy ride." It's his favorite saying, so I always have to think that. But it's, reading sort of unstructured work can feel like a really bumpy ride. So and then in the English language context, most readers of most sort of standardized English will expect this old new information to be intact. If it's not, they will have a reaction like, what's going on? And you probably have had that many times in your life reading stuff. And I can guarantee you that, well, I can't guarantee you because I didn't do a study on this, but in many cases, I would hypothesize it is because the old new contract was disrupted. And sometimes you can do it deliberately, but usually more in fiction or narrative nonfiction and research writing, because you want things to be smooth. So let me give you an example at the bottom here. And so I start off with a sentence.
Isabell, before you go into the example, I'm not sure if I understand your top sentence.
Oh, most readers of English expect the new information. So most readers expect new information. So when I start writing about something, like my father's house, that's the emphasis of my text or of the next few sentences. That should be at the beginning of the sentence, and the end of the sentence introduces new information. Like my father's, for example, this morning.
I'm still not understanding you say. Expect new information at the beginning.
At the end of the sentence, old information at the beginning.
Okay, because that slide is saying new.
Oh, oopsala. Thank you, Henry. I did not notice that. Let me change that. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Oopsies. I was like, what is it? Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, so that sentence was wrong. Apologies. How did this happen? I must have copied and pasted. Old information, the beginning of the sentence, new at the end. Old at the beginning, new at the end. Good. Thanks, Henry. So let me show you this example here. Let me change this a few times because I have the sentence. Hold on, I'm doing some live editing. This is always my fun part. Old. All right, I think now we're good. I think I caught them all. So here's the example. My father's house sat on a hill in the southern part of the Berkshires. So the new information I'm giving about my father's house is where it's located. It was built, my father's house, by a renowned local architect, Julia Wilderson, in the early 20th century. So again, old information is the father's house, which I'm giving in the first two sentences, new information about to my readers. Where it's located in the first sentence, who built it in the second sentence. And then I'm switching in the next sentence, because now I want to focus on Julia Wilderson. Wilderson was best known for a prairie-based style modeled after Frank Lloyd Wright. I could have continued saying, well, it was the house was owned by many people in my family, starting with my grandfather, right? And then I would have continued signaling to my reader, I'm continuing information about my father's house, because I would always put the new information at the end. What's happening here is a shift, because I'm shifting from the topic of my father's house towards the architect. And I do that by putting Wilderson in the old information slot in the next sentence, and then providing new information about her. So it would be weird to read here. Wilderson was a successful architect, and my father's house was owned by many people in my family. Because I'm like, what? How is that possible? Like, we're talking about Wilderson, the architect, then we're going back to the father and the house and who lived in there. That creates confusion and lack of flow in our writing. I constantly break old new contract when I'm drafting, because mostly my thinking isn't on that plane. So this is an important principle for me in my revision process, to kind of make sure that these in-between sentence transitions based on old versus new are intact. Gets a little more challenging at times when you have more complex sentences in academic writing, but you can still work with that. And I'll show you an example from a published piece a little bit later on. So this flows really well. Here, the known new contract, old new contract is intact, right? Because I switch, so I put whatever is old in bold and what's new in the sentence in italics, and it always gets picked up in that old position. Whatever is at the end of the previous sentence is at the beginning, whatever the focus is of the sentence is at the beginning of this passage, is at the beginning of the sentence. So let me show you an example with the same information where that's not happening. So if you read this, my father's house sat on a hill in the southern part of the Berkshires. Oh, before I do that, very quickly. So if I wanted to continue my writing here, so Wilderson was best known for a prairie-based style modeled after Frank Lloyd Wright. I have a couple of options here as a writer. We always do. I can continue writing about Wilderson. Wilderson went to school, blah, 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 wherever, and more about Wilderson. Then that becomes about Wilderson. And maybe then I need to make a new paragraph if I have a lot of information about Wilderson, right? Or I could continue writing. Maybe now I want to focus on Frank Lloyd Wright, because really that's the focus of this paragraph, is to get to Frank Lloyd Wright, who's a very famous US American architect. So Frank Lloyd Wright was was born in blah, 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 and worked in whatever. So I have those choices, but depending on what I want the focus of my narrative to be, I need to make sure that I present that in a way that is easily understandable and followable for my readers. So here's the example where that contract is broken. My father's house sat on a hill in the southern part of the Berkshires. Julia Wilderson, a renowned local architect, built the house in the early 20th century. Frank Lloyd Wright influenced her, who was best known for his prairie-based style. Should be a hit this here. Let me fix that. I don't know what I was doing here. So if you take a look at this is it's still, I mean, the writing is, the sentences are fine. There's nothing wrong with, grammatically everything's right. The sentences are not even that long. It's just that it starts getting a little choppy. And that's because Julia Wilderson is introduced in a sentence where we would expect old information to be. And that can be kind of like, you have this reaction like, who's Julia Wilderson? you find out about her in a sentence, but still you have that reaction. If the sentence were longer and more complex, it might be a lot harder to follow. So what I'm saying is you're asking a lot when you put new information that you haven't introduced at the beginning of a sentence. You're asking a lot of your reader to do intellectually in following your narrative.
Excuse me, Isabel.
Go ahead, Sila.
Yeah. How about the connecting words between the sentences?
It's an excellent question. So I'm going to talk about this in a second, CD. So you're talking about transition expressions like in addition, ultimately. Those can help when you can't figure out old versus new, and and if you have a new idea. I'm a big fan of transition words, and in research writing you have to use them more frequently than when you're writing sort of fiction or prose or non-narrative fiction or narrative non-fiction, because you're compressing a lot of information in a short amount of space. But even there, the transition words, even if you have them and you constantly break this old new kind of contract, the transition words can become very meaningless. But transition words are another way, or an additional tool to create connections. And I'll show a link for that in a second. So that's a great question, CP. But even here, a transition expression wouldn't help me. It's not like in addition or furthermore, because I introduce a piece of information at a place that is very challenging to understand for most readers of the English language, that, without having a context for why Julia Wilderson suddenly is important. Okay, so let me show you some more examples. So here the no and new contract is interrupted. So the old new contract helps us with a couple of things. It creates focus in a paragraph. I actually find it very useful. What I often find is that, especially in most research writing, is that one paragraph, well, in general, paragraphs should focus on one topic. And if you're talking about a particular illness, particular drug, particular treatment, it helps that if that treatment or drug is constantly in that old information slot, because you're continuing to provide new information about it in each sentence. And I find that sometimes when I write and I have paragraphs that are like 2 pages long, because I'm just in the, writing things down, I find it useful to look for where does old new kind of get interrupted. So when do I start introducing a new concept or a new thought or a new topic? And that's often when I need to make a new paragraph, or this should be a new paragraph. So it can really help us, this, by preserving or really honoring the old new contract in our sentences, in helping us focus a topic in each paragraph. It provides smooth transitions, like in between sentence transitions in particular. Again, identify the focus in each paragraph. That helps in the revision process. So not just creating and identifying it if you've already written it. And it also can help us to use topic sentences effectively. I'll talk about topic sentences in just a second, but those are the first sentences of each paragraph usually that create sort of an introduction to the paragraph, like a mini kind of thesis or mini kind of statement, what the paragraph is about, to summarize it for the reader so I know what to expect. And so old or new contract can help us to make sure we know when to put a topic sentence. And again, they can signal to readers when our focus is changing. And that's really important. And if you think about in the introduction section of an article, we talk a lot about the research gap. So if you're using the research gap in a paragraph, that is, switching from one topic to the next with a smooth transition with using old and new contract kind of stuff and sentence structure can be really helpful to gently introduce your reader to a new topic and then move on and write about that. So let me show you an example from a wonderful book by Anne Green. I don't know if I mentioned this book before in this course. If I haven't, I should have. It's a course that I use as a textbook in my writing course that I teach on science writing principle. It's called Writing Science in Plain English. And I was looking for it the other day. I don't know where it is. It's a very thin book. If you can't get a paper version, it takes a long time. I think there's a Kindle version of it on Amazon. If there's only one, if you're interested in scientific writing and really kind of doing a deeper dive into what are some other examples of effective writing and how to work with that, this is a great book to purchase because she really breaks it down. It's a lot of examples from scientific writing, variety of disciplines, with some exercises and some solutions for those exercises. It's great. So here is the paragraph, and ignore the whole, what she underlines and double underlines. That's really, she's also looking at subjects versus verbs in all of her sentences. That's where that comes from. But this paragraph is about a certain type of fish called, and hopefully pronouncing this right, cichlid fish. So the first topic sentence introduces a topic to us. In the Great Lakes of Africa, large and diverse species, flocks of cichlid fish have evolved rapidly. Lake Victoria, right? So we still have the old, more information about this first part, the old information, the Great Lakes. Lake Victoria, the largest of these lakes, had until recently at last 500 species of haplochromine cichlids. Again, hoping pronouncing this correctly. So here is our, our new information is the types of cichlid fish. We have flocks of cichlid fish. Then we get more information about this new topic of a particular type of species, these haplochromine cichlids. And then the rest of the paragraph continues with they having the cichlids in the old information slot, because we're going to get more and more information about these fish. So they were ecologically so diverse, blah, blah, blah. This species flock is the most notably. Many of its species, stenotopic rock-bellying cichlids, yet many such species. So each sentence has the fish, the cichlids, or a version of that in their subject, in their old information slot, which is mostly the subject. It's the subject of the sentence, right? The thing that's doing something that we get more information, new information every single time at the end. This is a great example, I think, of creating that unity and that coherence in the paragraph with not having to use too many transition expressions, right? So you can really have the sentence structure drive it. This is really helpful when you're focusing on one particular topic. If you're tackling a couple of different tangents in a paragraph, which sometimes you have to in the introduction section, you might have to rely more on transition expressions because that smoothness is a little harder to achieve because you might have to cover a large ground, but you can still preserve some of that even without using too many. Because if you use, however, in addition, furthermore, thus, in every sentence you write ever in your writing, it's going to get also kind of repetitive and it's a little too much. So we have to, really use what we have out there to create the best possible flow with as many possible tools that we can have. Let me show you another example and also talk a little bit about topic sentences with this example as well. This comes from an article in IRB Ethics and Human Research published in 2017. It's on research ethics committees in Nigeria. It's a survey-based study. And this is the first paragraph in the in this article. So I'm going to read through it with you. Heightened global commitment to research on disease such as HIV, AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria has led to increased research over the past decade in many African countries, including Nigeria. And so old information, right? Global commitment. And here is it has led to increased research. It's the new information we're getting, like, oh, guess what? There's increased research in many African countries, including Nigeria. And then the next sentence starts with this increased investment by the international community, which is basically what exactly the last part of the previous sentence said, this increased research in many African countries. So increased investment by the international community, which is, so it's the heightened global commitment to research. Sorry, this is the morning, my tea hasn't kicked in. So heightened global commitment to research. This increased investment by the national community is driven by global as well as regional declarations and commitments that reflect a desire to help reduce disease burden while fostering blah, blah, blah. This increase in research, same thing, right? Here. This increase in research has led to debates about the ethics of health research in resource-poor developing countries and has drawn further attention to existing ethical review processes. And now we have a shift. We go to some of these discussions, which relates back to the debates, right? So here was the new information about this increase in research. And now I want to write more about this. So I'm going to put it at the beginning of the next sentence. Old information. So these is the connector that we need. I find that a lot of writers tend to not effectively or at all use these or this as a great way for smooth transitions. It is usually when I provide, and I just work with a colleague of mine in Germany who sent me an article that he was working on. And I gave some editorial feedback on parts of it. And some of the most suggestions I made, well, first of all, shortening sentences, because he's a German writer, so I relate to that. And he's writing for international audience, mainly in English. And then also like these, adding these or this, and making those stronger connections, right? And it really, if you think about it in the old versus new framework, it makes sense because you're moving what was new in the previous sentence to the old spot in the next one, because you're shifting to now focus on these discussions. It helps to emphasize that. So these discussions have focused on the creation and application of both the national local and codes of practice, blah, blah, blah. So here are then all this new information that we need of what these discussions have focused on. So you have only one switch of where the writer took something new and put in the old. And I want to highlight to you the different ways of saying the same thing or expressing same idea. Heightened global commitment to research. Again, this, right? This increased investment, this increase in research. So increase, are similar but not the same, increase in research. And it creates that kind of repetition and rhythm that we need as readers to be able to follow. Because otherwise there's a lot of complexity here, like a lot of long words, very researchy, but it's effectively structured because it does follow that old versus new contract. Any questions, thoughts, comments? Let me see if I'm missing anything in the chat. I don't think so. I don't see anything. Is this making sense? Sort of. It's a little, it's the most abstract thing I'll ever do with you when it comes to language stuff. And I'm doing it because I think it can be incredibly useful. But go ahead. Anybody has a question, comment, thought? Let's look at an example. Actually, before we do this, let me clear my drawings. So this is from the same article. Here is the last sentence that is at the end. Some of these discussions have focused, right? So it's the end of that first paragraph. And this is not right. Sorry about this. This was the same sentence. Give me a second. Let me see if I can find this article quickly. I copied and pasted the wrong. I did this late last night. This was a new slide for me because I wanted to add something on topic sentences. So bear with me for a second. Let me see. Let me find you in my many folders. I'm going to spare you taking a look at that because it's a little of a crazy organization. Where did I find this? Let me see. I'm going to open my Adobe because I think I might still have it up there. Give me a sec. Yep. Thank you for recently opened. So I'm going to paste the correct sentence there. If it only would open for me. There we go. So I will resend the slide deck to you because obviously I messed up royally on this today. So give me a second to edit this a little bit so it's more easily readable, and then we'll take a look at it. Let me make this double space. I want to have spaced. We are back in business. So let me go on this slide. So scratch the last few minutes. Here is the end of that first paragraph. Some of these discussions that focus on the creation application on both, blah, blah, blah. So, right. So, and then it continues. The next topic sentence, the next paragraph starts with this topic sentence. While the majority of literature on RECs has emerged from a high income context, a growing literature from and about RECs in developing countries has more recently surfaced. So it provides a transition while the majority of literature has emerged from high context, which is something that the first paragraph is sort of expressed. A growing literature from and about RECs in developing countries has more recently surfaced. So I'm expecting in the next paragraph, which the paragraph indeed does, for example, and here would be a good time to use something like for example. For example, a study by blah, 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 or several studies over the past 10 years, several studies have been published on RECs in, insert a group of developing countries, as the writer identifies. And so we get a lot of examples, each sentence giving us a new example of different research on RECs from developing countries. So a topic sentence like this is useful in two ways. First, it sets the stage for what the paragraph is about, but it also provides a transition to the previous paragraph. And sometimes it can be as simple as furthermore, but often we have to do a little bit more and have to connect it thematically with the previous, so I often see, and this is the part that I often see missing, and we'll do some more topic sentence practice some other time in another context of a workshop. But the idea is that sometimes you could just use a transition expression, but it's often as simple as saying, in addition to work on whatever was discussed in the previous paragraph, there is also this. This is the spirit of these topic sentences, creating transitions. Because if you have a topic sentence that just introduces the topic, but doesn't provide a connection to the previous paragraph, especially an intro and the discussion at times, it can be a little difficult. It can become a little choppy. Maybe less on the discussion, but certainly in the introduction section. And also when you're writing your narratives for proposals, if you want to, and either grants or IRB proposals, if you have to provide a lot of background and context for the study, those transitions are really important. All right, so that's the topic sentence stuff here. And let's look at one more example. We're going to do some work together here. So take a look at this paragraph. It's something one of my students wrote in of Masters in Pharmaceutics. Something, it's in the School of Pharmacy somewhere. I'm blanking on the title. This is not my brain is still, part of my brain is still asleep, I feel. Hopefully it'll wake up eventually. But take a look at this sentence and let me know either in the chat or if you want to go off on the mic where you feel there is, and you don't have to look at the old new, you can, but read this paragraph and tell me where you feel it's choppy. Is there there's particular one passage I think is super choppy and really kind of jarring. And what do you notice? If you read this in your direction like, huh? That's what I'm looking for. Let me see. So what do you notice? Is there a particular sentence or anything that feels like not very connected or kind of out of nowhere, or you would move some things around?
Isabel?
Yes, go ahead, Jeanette.
Hi. Yeah, I think I would probably start with how many people are affected will, what it is, first of all. Right, so a definition of cystic fibrosis, probably not going into so much detail as the student has done here, in terms of going into what the body produces, thick mucus, etc., etc. All right, so I would have started with a definition, then the worldwide prevalence or how many people are affected, then the United States, then go into stuff about how it affects the body, and then the pancreas, etc. I think that might take.
So, the student is doing that, right? They're starting with a general definition with some detail. They're going into worldwide numbers. They're talking about the US. And where would you make the change then? What would you change? So that sounds exactly like what the student is doing, right? Just with less detail, as you're saying. So where would you make the change?
Oh, I was just saying I wouldn't have gone into so much detail in the first sentence. With respect
it's a paper for for a class. It's not for publication, right? So they want to show off what they know. Good point.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, that's what I spotted so far.
Okay. Okay. So you feel like this paragraph flows well?
I think I would have started how it affects the body in a different paragraph. Maybe a second paragraph.
So you would sort of do a break here?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Yeah. And start off by saying that cystic fibrosis affects the pancreas or something, instead of the pancreas being the subject.
You got it, Jeanette. And that's the one big break. That's the big chain. That's the big problem here about, like, where does the pancreas suddenly come from? So what you're describing is it's the old new contract has been broken, like cystic fibrosis over blah, 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 affecting the United States. Okay, all that stuff I'm buying. But then, and the pancreas is mentioned earlier, but then it comes back 2 sentences later as a subject. Like, what about the pancreas? That's the biggest problem of this paragraph. And it's almost, I like your thought. I didn't think of it. I like the idea of like maybe having one paragraph on some background info and then the next one on how it affects the body. Absolutely right. Because this would be, if you're working with, it's like, oh, I need to change something here. And it's because old new stuff has been interrupted. So on the money. Anybody else, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, starting with the pancreas was a little bump, I thought.
Yeah, it was the bumpy road, as my kid would say. Yes.
Yeah.
So let me show you the revisions. I gave the students some feedback, of course.
I want to.
Oh, go ahead, Nita. Go ahead, Nita. Go ahead.
There is no any statistics explained in this paragraph about this study. Like
Nita, I didn't hear you. What is it? Say that one more time, Nita. I couldn't understand you.
Yeah, I am saying that there is no any statistics or any prevalence or frequency explained in this paragraph, like what other countries says about the prevalence of this disease. Means only one line is written about the worldwide and US and what other countries, and it is not explain the different countries. Also, not funnel shape like explanation. Means the repetition, I can see the repetition, like the effect of lungs written in first, second line, also repeating in the last, third line, etc., etc. Means there is no any sinking in the paragraph.
Okay. You said something is repeated in the second sentence and in the third last sentence?
Yes. Somehow repetition.
The repetition?
Yes.
What is repeated? Tell me exactly what is repeated. I guess I'm not seeing it, but that might not be, it's not there.
Yeah, like written in the mucus blocks and the lungs, digestive system, etc., etc. And these are also explaining in this enzyme help. I think it should be linked from the second line.
Yeah, so
not be.
Yeah. I think you're making a good point. I agree with you. You're making a good point, but there's something in this first sentence about how it's affected by the body, and it's really sort of picked up here, right? So this part, so it's almost like the part in here, like the worldwide and the US stuff, seems a little out of place here, and not like it's taken out, but when you put something. And to your earlier point about not mentioning other countries, sure, I agree with you, but that's really content level kind of feedback, which is important. This student was writing about the United States specifically. So that's, I think, why it's an introductory paragraph. But it's a really good observation, right? There's some things missing, a larger context that might be needed depending on who your audience is. But from a structural level, you're right. And that's a good, there's some repetition. I don't mind the repetition so much, like digestion of food, digestive system, if it makes sense. But here it's like you're talking about the digestive system, then about something else, and then again return back to it. So the coherence and the connection isn't quite there. So yeah, I totally agree with that. That's a good observation I haven't made before with this, the digestive piece and digestion of food on here. Any other thoughts?
And just to add to that, so she could have also said something about how it elaborate on the lungs, how it actually affects the lungs, because she mentioned digestive system in the first sentence, and went on to explain about it a bit more later on. So there's something missing. The reader might want to know, well, how does it affect the lungs?
Correct, because she mentions all three. Or if she doesn't want to talk about the lungs, tell us why not. You know what I mean? Like, you know, maybe saying why the lungs are also the most important focus in our research has been on whatever, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah. Good point, Jeanette. Nita, anything else?
Yes. In this first line, it is written, cystic fibrosis is a hereditary and life-threatening condition. I think we can also explain about this disease. What is the reason of this disease? Can we explain it here? Should we explain here that what is the cause of this disease?
You know, and that's a question, Nita, I think that goes beyond looking at the structure of the writing, but it's a good question. I honestly, I don't know. I'm trying to think
I think we should write what is the cause of this disease, because it is here only written the effect of this disease. But why this disease happened, there is no anything written here.
Well, I think she does write it's a hereditary disease, right? So it seems to happen through, you know, you're based on your genetic, right? It's in your genes.
Yeah, it's only one line. If I talk about the diabetes, so diabetes is also a hereditary or some kind of disease, but we can also the lack of insulin, it causes diabetes. So somehow we should explain here what is the reason of this disease, what happened when this disease happen. So
yeah.
What?
Those are great points, Nita, and I appreciate you making these points. I know I'm talking to a group of like physicians here, right? Folks in the medical field, you know a lot more about this than I do. So and you're absolutely right. So and it's almost like this paragraph could be several paragraphs, depending on how much information you want to add to it. But the information you're mentioning that could be added is something that you as the writer make the choice of including or not including, depending on who your audience is, right? So just but whatever you do, I think you're right. It would be, there's a lot more to be explained about cystic fibrosis, and we mentioned, but you might only have 100 words to do that. So what do you choose, right? So obviously here focus has been on just giving a brief overview that is missing some aspects that might not be able to be included in that paragraph, depending on who your audience is. But those are really, I love the way that you're taking, it's like, hey, how about this needs to be added as well? And that is a choice that you make, or that you need to make as the author, what is necessary, or that your reviewers will tell you what you need to add, what's missing, right? So don't feel like, oh my God, am I having everything? Do I need everything? Because your reviewers in the manuscript revision process will also help you, will also shape some of that. And there's always somebody who will say you're missing this, or too much of this, or not enough of this. And then you can also make a decision of what you want to add and not. So so let me show you the revision, because we're coming up at the end of our time here, and I have a meeting in a few minutes. I can be late to it a little bit, but I don't think we got through all the slides. But any other last thoughts on this passage? And again, if it's about what other information is missing, let's move on from that, because I do want to emphasize getting back a little bit to the structural things that we need to look at that have to do with the content. But any last thoughts on your cystic fibrosis? I didn't know this about the whole that it can be like insulin plays a role. Well, it makes sense of the pancreas, right? So there you go. So that's a little understanding I have of the human body. Pancreas and insulin is connected. So here is the original version on the top, and here is the revision on the bottom. Oops, let me see. So what I've done, and just based on, so let me walk you, well, the suggestions I made and the students eventually took them to this. So she switched it to actually starting off like who is affected by cystic fibrosis, blah, blah, blah. And it's just based on the structure she had in there. This was, I think there was another paragraph before. So cystic fibrosis, blah, blah, blah. It is a hereditary and life-threatening condition in which the body produces thick mucus that blocks and affects, because of CF, the pancreas. So what she did is she took that first part and moved it towards the middle. So you'll have the connection of the pancreas, right? This is the change that was needed for one of the big bumps. Do I think that it would be helpful to start off with just a definition of cystic fibrosis before going into details about the numbers? Yes, I do. And I think in the second run revision, she actually split. I think she decided to split and just focus on cystic fibrosis and then return to more detailed information about what it does. But the big change here, and I want to emphasize because of this old versus new, which was that bump earlier, right, that Jeanette was describing, it's sort of where you would break, you have to make a new section, is that the sentence before ends with pancreas and then picks up the pancreas as a subject of the next sentence. In that old information slot, then providing more information what the pancreas does, namely stops producing enzymes, which really the rest of the paragraph focus on these enzymes, the lack of such enzymes, right? So this transition was necessary. So putting the pancreas at the end, using it where it is in the new information slot, and then using it in the next sentence in the old info slot. So we provide that change in topic. It is smooth for the reader. That's the biggest, that was the big change I wanted to emphasize here. And all of your other thoughts and feedback would be equally relevant to make this paragraph stronger and probably expand it, potentially make it into 2 paragraphs. I actually like that idea. So I might need to go back and play around with this some more for a second level revision for the next time I do this workshop. We are at the end of the hour. We didn't get through all of let me see how many slides we have left. Give me a sec. We had a little bit of other practice. That's okay. We can do this actually when we get to some other stuff I want to do with you in another workshop. But I wanted to show this to you because I think, Sita, you were the one who brought up transition words. I put in the resources section at the end a website from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill about transitions. And what I like about this, and I'm going to scroll down here quickly, it gives an overview of transitional expressions for similarity, exception, contrast, sequence, order, time, example, emphasis, place, position, and so on. And so these are very useful to keep because if you're like me, I always say furthermore, 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 furthermore. Like, for heaven's sake, there's other ways to say it. So it's a nice kind of cheat sheet to keep close by as you're revising your work, if you're in need of transition expressions. And we'll look at another example at some other time when we talk about a different aspect. And I'll bring back the conversation about transition expressions. So, okay, this is the most technical part of this workshop series around sentence paragraph structure. Any last comments, thoughts? Does this make sense to you with the old new? I think there's another video I can send you where somebody reviews some passages and goes over if you want some more practice on that. I think I might even have it in the resource section here. Not entirely sure. Anyway, any thoughts, comments, questions? I have wowed you all. You're like, okay, go ahead, Daisy. Yeah, go ahead. I think this one website here, I'll show it to you. It's this Climb website, and I have it in the PowerPoint. There's a passage for more practice. Well, you can ignore the first part of information about the science communication program. You don't need this, but there's an online course. I mentioned this before. That's the one that I used a lot for the pieces on the different sections of a paragraph. But the Climb program, which is this website here, has some really fun videos. Some focus on NIH grant, but here's some principles for readable sentences, and they review the old new contract as well and echo words. And so it's a great video. I'd recommend you take a look at that if you want some further exposure to this. All right. Good. Henry, any last wise thoughts?
Always thoughts. Whether they're wise or not is another matter. So yeah, thanks for sharing those resources on the web. That's very helpful. Since you mentioned it, I bought this book several months ago, but I have to admit I haven't looked at it. But you gave me the motivation to start reading it. The chapter titles are just amazing, and I see that, fortunately, I concentrate on a lot of those things, like the active voice, choose your words with care, omit needless words. That's a big thing. I thought choose your words with care. One of those first slides you showed about the, something about boost blah, blah, and fight. I mean, those words are just so engaging.
Yes. Yes.
And that's why I think I told you this before, that whenever possible, I try to avoid the words is, was, were. Those are really lazy words. Puts me to sleep. And
I like that, lazy words. I'm going to use that. That's a good way of thinking about it. Yeah. You know, and listen, I use them all the time when I'm drafting, and I have to revise for all of this every single time I do a writing project. Especially when it's longer.
Yeah, I mean, when you're first writing, you're just trying to get your thoughts on paper. And then the second part is trying to make it coherent, as compact as possible, that still explains, because, if you could write a 3-page paper instead of a 5-page paper and then says the same thing, probably says it better if you write it shorter. So I think that's very important to go through the paper and really make sure it, I mean, you used the word, it flows, and that it's in a logical order. And I think a session on transition phrases or words are very important. Because I find that lacking in a lot of papers as well, because I go from one paragraph to the other and I said, oh, wait a second, where am I now?
I mean, even in published work, I mean, it's actually not just, I mean, sometimes just because something is published doesn't necessarily mean it's the greatest writing ever. Because the bottom line is that if your science is solid, and journal wants to publish it, they will publish it. But just because something is published doesn't mean it's always the best organized. And I wish it sometimes were, because it really makes it easier for us. It was different when journals still had copy editors working for them. Then most journals can't afford them anymore. And the copy editor would look at those kinds of things, right? And but that doesn't mean that we don't have to do that. We're all going to be the new champions of transitions.
Right. Well, it should be considered a work of art. Yes, right. So anyway, those are some of my thoughts. I'll
make those changes to the PowerPoint. Jeanette, in particular, your suggestion is a good one, and I'll resend it and then use that slide deck, not the one with my many, many mistakes.
Okay, very good. This is very exciting. And I think next week I'll ask for volunteers again for an update on their proposal or some feedback on the proposal. I think there isn't a concept that we do this too many times. I think getting the feedback is key, and it's a luxury to get feedback from people. So anyway, I don't want to keep people any longer. So thanks for joining, and
bye everyone.
We'll see you next week. Okay, bye now.